Chapter 57 of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 57 In the Lucerne Patch. Our readers must now allow us to transport them again to the enclosure surrounding M. de Villefort's house, and, behind the gate, half screened from view by the large chestnut trees which on all sides spread their luxuriant branches, we shall find some people of our acquaintance. This time Maximilian was the first to arrive. He was intently watching for a shadow to appear among the trees, and waiting with anxiety the sound of a light step on the gravel walk. At length the long-desired sound was heard, and instead of one figure, as he had expected, he perceived that two were approaching him. The delay had been occasioned by a visit from Madame Danglars and Eugénie, which had been prolonged beyond the time at which Valentine was expected. That she might not appear to fail in her promise to Maximilian, she proposed to Mademoiselle Danglars that they should take a walk in the garden, being anxious to show that the delay, which was doubtless a cause of vexation to him, was not occasioned by any neglect on her part. The young man, with the intuitive perception of a lover, quickly understood the circumstances in which she was involuntarily placed, and he was comforted. Besides, although she avoided coming within speaking distance, Valentine arranged so that Maximilian could see her pass and repass, and each time she went by, she managed, unperceived by her companion, to cast an expressive look at the young man, which seemed to say, "Have patience; you see it is not my fault." And Maximilian was patient, and employed himself in mentally contrasting the two girls, one fair, with soft languishing eyes, a figure gracefully bending like a weeping willow; the other a brunette, with a fierce and haughty expression, and as straight as a poplar. It is unnecessary to state that, in the eyes of the young man, Valentine did not suffer by the contrast. In about half an hour the girls went away, and Maximilian understood that Mademoiselle Danglars' visit had at last come to an end. In a few minutes Valentine re-entered the garden alone. For fear that anyone should be observing her return, she walked slowly, and instead of immediately directing her steps towards the gate, she seated herself on a bench, and carefully casting her eyes around to convince herself that she was not watched, she presently arose and proceeded quickly to join Maximilian. "Good evening, Valentine," said a well-known voice. "Good evening, Maximilian. I know I have kept you waiting, but you saw the cause of my delay." "Yes, I recognized Mademoiselle Danglars. I was not aware that you were so intimate with her." "Who told you we were intimate, Maximilian?" "No one, but you appeared to be so. From the manner in which you walked and talked together, one would have thought you were two schoolgirls telling your secrets to each other." "We were having a confidential conversation," returned Valentine. "She was owning to me her repugnance to the marriage with M. de Morcerf, and I, on the other hand, was confessing to her how wretched it made me to think of marrying M. d'Épinay." "Dear Valentine!" "That will account to you for the unreserved manner which you observed between me and Eugénie, as in speaking of the man whom I could not love, my thoughts involuntarily reverted to him on whom my affections were fixed." "Ah, how good you are to say so, Valentine! You possess a quality which can never belong to Mademoiselle Danglars. It is that indefinable charm which is to a woman what perfume is to the flower, and flavor to the fruit, for the beauty of either is not the only quality we seek." "It is your love which makes you look upon everything in that light." "No, Valentine, I assure you such is not the case. I was observing you both when you were walking in the garden, and, on my honor, without at all wishing to deprecate the beauty of Mademoiselle Danglars, I cannot understand how any man can really love her. The fact is, Maximilian, that I was there, and my presence had the effect of rendering you unjust in your comparison." "No, but tell me, it is a question of simple curiosity, and which was suggested by certain ideas passing in my mind relative to Mademoiselle Danglars." "I dare say it is something disparaging which you are going to say. It only proves how little indulgence we may expect from your sex," interrupted Valentine. You cannot, at least, deny that you are very harsh judges of each other. If we are so, it is because we generally judge under the influence of excitement. But return to your question. Does Mademoiselle Danglars object to this marriage with M. de Morcerf on account of loving another? I told you I was not on terms of strict intimacy with Eugénie. Yes, but girls tell each other secrets without being particularly intimate. Own now that you did question her on the subject. Ah, I see you are smiling. If you are already aware of the conversation that passed, the wooden partition which interposed between us and you has proved but a slight security. Come, what did she say?" "She told me that she loved no one," said Valentine; "that she disliked the idea of being married; that she would infinitely prefer leading an independent and unfettered life, and that she almost wished her father might lose his fortune, that she might become an artist like her friend Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly." "Ah, you see?" "Well, what does that prove?" asked Valentine. "Nothing," replied Maximilian. "Then why did you smile?" "Why, you know very well that you are reflecting on yourself, Valentine." "Do you want me to go away?" "Ah, no, no; but do not let us lose time. You are the subject on which I wish to speak." "True, we must be quick, for we have scarcely 10 minutes more to pass together." "Ma foi!" said Maximilian in consternation. "Yes, you are right. I am but a poor friend to you. What a life I caused you to lead, poor Maximilian, you who are formed for happiness! I bitterly reproach myself, I assure you." "Well, what does it signify, Valentine, so long as I am satisfied, and feel that even this long and painful suspense is amply repaid by 5 minutes of your society, or 2 words from your lips? And I have also a deep conviction that Heaven would not have created 2 hearts harmonizing as ours do, and almost miraculously brought us together, to separate us at last." "Those are kind and cheering words. You must hope for us both, Maximilian; that will make me at least partly happy." "But why must you leave me so soon?" "I do not know particulars. I can only tell you that Madame de Villefort sent to request my presence, as she had a communication to make on which a part of my fortune depended. Let them take my fortune, I am already too rich; and perhaps, when they have taken it, they will leave me in peace and quietness. You would love me as much if I were poor, would you not, Maximilian?" "Oh, I shall always love you. What should I care for either riches or poverty, if my Valentine was near me, and I felt certain that no one could deprive me of her? But do you not fear that this communication may relate to your marriage?" "I do not think that is the case." "However it may be, Valentine, you must not be alarmed. I assure you that as long as I live I shall never love anyone else." "You think to reassure me when you say that, Maximilian." "Pardon me, you are right, I am a brute. But I was going to tell you that I met M. de Morcerf the other day." "Well?" "M. Franz is his friend, you know." "What then?" "M. de Morcerf has received a letter from Franz announcing his immediate return." Valentine turned pale, and leaned her hand against the gate. "Ah, heavens, if it were that! But no, the communication would not come through Madame de Villefort." "Why not?" "Because—I scarcely know why, but it has appeared as if Madame de Villefort secretly objected to the marriage, although she did not choose openly to oppose it." "Is it so? Then I feel as if I could adore Madame de Villefort." "Do not be in such a hurry to do that," said Valentine, with a sad smile. "If she objects to your marrying M. d'Épinay, she would be all the more likely to listen to any other proposition." "No, Maximilian, it is not suitors to which Madame de Villefort objects, it is marriage itself." "Marriage? If she dislikes that so much, why did she ever marry herself?" "You do not understand me, Maximilian. About a year ago I talked of retiring to a convent. Madame de Villefort, in spite of all the remarks which she considered it her duty to make, secretly approved of the proposition. My father consented to it at her instigation, and it was only on account of my poor grandfather that I finally abandoned the project." You can form no idea of the expression of that old man's eye when he looks at me, the only person in the world whom he loves, and I had almost said, by whom he is beloved in return. When he learned of my resolution, I shall never forget the reproachful look which he cast on me, and the tears of utter despair which chased each other down his lifeless cheeks. Ah, Maximilian, I experienced at that moment such remorse for my intention, that throwing myself at his feet, I exclaimed, 'Forgive me, pray forgive me, my dear grandfather. They may do what they will with me, I will never leave you.' When I had ceased speaking, he thankfully raised his eyes to heaven, but without uttering a word. Ah, Maximilian, I may have much to suffer, but I feel as if my grandfather's look at that moment would more than compensate for all. Dear Valentine, you are a perfect angel, and I am sure I do not know what I, sabring right and left among the Bedouins, can have done to merit your being revealed to me, unless, indeed, heaven took into consideration the fact that the victims of my sword were infidels. But tell me what interest Madame de Villefort can have in your remaining unmarried." "Did I not tell you just now that I was rich, Maximilian? Too rich? I possess nearly 50,000 livres in right of my mother. My grandfather and my grandmother, the Marquis and Marquise de Saint Méran, will leave me as much, and M. Noirtier evidently intends making me his heir. My brother Edward, who inherits nothing from his mother, will, therefore, be poor in comparison with me. Now, if I had taken the veil, all this fortune would have descended to my father, and, in reversion, to his son. Ah, how strange it seems that such a young and beautiful woman should be so avaricious! It is not for herself that she is so, but for her son, and what you regard as a vice becomes almost a virtue when looked at in the light of maternal love. But could you not compromise matters and give up a portion of your fortune to her son?" "How could I make such a proposition, especially to a woman who always professes to be so entirely disinterested?" "Valentine, I have always regarded our love in the light of something sacred; consequently I have covered it with the veil of respect, and hid it in the innermost recesses of my soul. No human being, not even my sister, is aware of its existence. Valentine, will you permit me to make a confidant of a friend, and reveal to him the love I bear you?" Valentine started. "A friend, Maximilian? Who is this friend? I tremble to give my permission." "Listen, Valentine. Have you never experienced for anyone that sudden and irresistible sympathy which made you feel as if the object of it had been your old and familiar friend, though in reality it was the first time you had ever met? Nay, further, have you never endeavored to recall the time, place, and circumstances of your former intercourse, and, failing in this attempt, have almost believed that your spirits must have held converse with each other in some state of being anterior to the present, and that you are only now occupied in a reminiscence of the past?" "Yes." "Well, that is precisely the feeling which I experienced when I first saw that extraordinary man." "Extraordinary, did you say?" "Yes." "You have known him for some time, then?" "Scarcely longer than 8 or 10 days." "And do you call a man your friend whom you have only known for 8 or 10 days? Ah, Maximilian, I had hoped you set a higher value on the title of friend." "Your logic is most powerful, Valentine; but say what you will, I can never renounce the sentiment which has instinctively taken possession of my mind. I feel as if it were ordained that this man should be associated with all the good which the future may have in store for me, and sometimes it really seems as if his eye was able to see what was to come, and his hand endowed with the power of directing events according to his own will." "He must be a prophet, then," said Valentine, smiling. "Indeed," said Maximilian, "I have often been almost tempted to attribute to him the gift of prophecy. At all events, he has a wonderful power of foretelling any future good." "Ah," said Valentine in a mournful tone, "do let me see this man, Maximilian; he may tell me whether I shall ever be loved sufficiently to make amends for all I have suffered." "My poor girl, you know him already." "I know him?" Yes, it was he who saved the life of your stepmother and her son." "The Count of Monte Cristo?" "The same." "Ah," cried Valentine, "he is too much the friend of Madame de Villefort ever to be mine." "The friend of Madame de Villefort? It cannot be. Surely, Valentine, you are mistaken." "No, indeed I am not, for I assure you his power over our household is almost unlimited. Courted by my stepmother, who regards him as the epitome of human wisdom, admired by my father, who says he has never before heard such sublime ideas so eloquently expressed, idolized by Edward, who, notwithstanding his fear of the count's large black eyes, runs to meet him the moment he arrives, and opens his hand, in which he is sure to find some delightful present, M. de Monte Cristo appears to exert a mysterious and almost uncontrollable influence over all the members of our family." "If such be the case, my dear Valentine, you must yourself have felt, or at all events will soon feel, the effects of his presence. He meets Albert de Morcerf in Italy; it is to rescue him from the hands of the banditti. He introduces himself to Madame Danglars; it is that he may give her a royal present. Your stepmother and her son pass before his door; it is that his Nubian may save them from destruction. This man evidently possesses the power of influencing events, both as regards men and things. I never saw more simple tastes united to greater magnificence. His smile is so sweet when he addresses me, that I forget it can ever be bitter to others. Ah, Valentine, tell me, if he ever looked on you with one of those sweet smiles? If so, depend on it, you will be happy." "Me?" said the young girl; "he never even glances at me. On the contrary, if I accidentally cross his path, he appears rather to avoid me." "Ah, he is not generous, neither does he possess that supernatural penetration which you attribute to him; for if he did, he would have perceived that I was unhappy; and if he had been generous, seeing me sad and solitary, he would have used his influence to my advantage; and since, as you say, he resembles the sun, he would have warmed my heart with one of his life–giving rays." "You say he loves you, Maximilian; how do you know that he does? All would pay deference to an officer like you, with a fierce moustache and a long sabre, but they think they may crush a poor weeping girl with impunity." "Ah, Valentine, I assure you you are mistaken. If it were otherwise, if he treated me diplomatically, that is to say, like a man who wishes, by some means or other, to obtain a footing in the house, so that he may ultimately gain the power of dictating to its occupants, he would, if it had been but once, have honored me with the smile which you extol so loudly. But no, he saw that I was unhappy, he understood that I could be of no use to him, and therefore paid no attention to me whatever. Who knows but what, in order to please Madame de Villefort and my father, he may not persecute me by every means in his power? It is not just that he should despise me so without any reason." "Ah, forgive me," said Valentine, perceiving the effect which her words were producing on Maximilian. "I have done wrong, for I have given utterance to thoughts concerning that man which I did not even know existed in my heart. I do not deny the influence of which you speak, or that I have not myself experienced it, but with me it has been productive of evil rather than good." "Well, Valentine," said Morrel with a sigh, "we will not discuss the matter further. I will not make a confidant of him." "Alas," said Valentine, "I see that I have given you pain. I can only say how sincerely I ask pardon for having grieved you; but indeed I am not prejudiced beyond the power of conviction. Tell me what this Count of Monte Cristo has done for you." "I own that your question embarrasses me, Valentine, for I cannot say that the count has rendered me any ostensible service. Still, as I have already told you, I have an instinctive affection for him, the source of which I cannot explain to you. Has the sun done anything for me? No, he warms me with his rays, and it is by his light that I see you, nothing more. Has such and such a perfume done anything for me? No, its odor charms one of my senses, that is all I can say when I am asked why I praise it. My friendship for him is as strange and unaccountable as his for me. A secret voice seems to whisper to me that there must be something more than chance in this unexpected reciprocity of friendship. In his most simple actions, as well as in his most secret thoughts, I find a relation to my own. You will, perhaps, smile at me when I tell you that, ever since I have known this man, I have involuntarily entertained the idea that all the good fortune which has befallen me originated from him. However, I have managed to live 30 years without his protection, you will say. But I will endeavor a little to illustrate my meaning. He invited me to dine with him on Saturday, which was a very natural thing for him to do. Well, what have I learned since? That your mother and M. de Villefort are both coming to this dinner. I shall meet them there, and who knows what future advantages may result from the interview? This may appear to you to be no unusual combination of circumstances. Nevertheless, I perceive some hidden plot in the arrangement, something, in fact, more than is apparent on a casual view of the subject. I believe that this singular man, who appears to fathom the motives of everyone, has purposely arranged for me to meet M. and Madame de Villefort, and sometimes, I confess, I have gone so far as to try to read in his eyes whether he was in possession of the secret of our love." "My good friend," said Valentine, "I should take you for a visionary, and should tremble for your reason, if I were always to hear you talk in a strain similar to this. Is it possible that you can see anything more than the merest chance in this meeting? Pray reflect a little. My father, who never goes out, has several times been on the point of refusing this invitation. Madame de Villefort, on the contrary, is burning with the desire of seeing this extraordinary nabob in his own house. Therefore she has with great difficulty prevailed on my father to accompany her. No, no, it is as I have said, Maximilian. There is no one in the world of whom I can ask help but yourself and my grandfather, who is little better than a corpse." "I see that you are right, logically speaking," said Maximilian, "but the gentle voice which usually has such power over me fails to convince me today." "I feel the same as regards yourself," said Valentine, "and I own that, if you have no stronger proof to give me——" "I have another," replied Maximilian, "but I fear you will deem it even more absurd than the first." "So much the worse," said Valentine, smiling. "It is, nevertheless, conclusive to my mind. My 10 years of service have also confirmed my ideas on the subject of sudden inspirations, for I have several times owed my life to a mysterious impulse which directed me to move at once either to the right or to the left, in order to escape the ball which killed the comrade fighting by my side, while it left me unharmed." "Dear Maximilian, why do you not attribute your escape to my constant prayers for your safety? When you are away, I no longer pray for myself, but for you." "Yes, since you have known me," said Morrel, smiling; "but that cannot apply to the time previous to our acquaintance, Valentine." "You are very provoking, and will not give me credit for anything. But let me hear this second proof which you yourself own to be absurd." "Well, look through this opening, and you will see the beautiful new horse which I rode here." "Ah, what a beautiful creature!" cried Valentine. "Why did you not bring him close to the gate, so that I could talk to him and pat him?" "He is, as you see, a very valuable animal," said Maximilian. "You know that my means are limited, and that I am what would be designated a man of moderate pretensions. Well, I went to a horse dealer's, where I saw this magnificent horse, which I have named Médéah. I asked the price; they told me it was 4,500 francs. I was therefore obliged to give it up, as you may imagine; but I own I went away with a rather heavy heart, for the horse had looked at me affectionately, had rubbed his head against me, and, when I mounted him, had pranced in the most delightful way imaginable, so that I was altogether fascinated with him. The same evening some friends of mine visited me, M. de Château Renaud, M. Debray, and 5 or 6 other choice spirits, whom you do not know even by name. They proposed a game of bouillotte. I never play, for I am not rich enough to afford to lose, or sufficiently poor to desire to gain; but I was at my own house, you understand, so there was nothing to be done but to send for the cards, which I did. Just as they were sitting down to table, M. de Monte Cristo arrived. He took his seat amongst them, they played, and I won. I am almost ashamed to say that my gains amounted to 5,000 francs. We separated at midnight. I could not defer my pleasure, so I took a cabriolet and drove to the horse dealer's. Feverish and excited, I rang at the door. The person who opened it must have taken me for a madman, for I rushed at once to the stable. Médéah was standing at the rack, eating his hay. I immediately put on the saddle and bridle, to which operation he lent himself with the best grace possible. Then, putting the 4,500 francs into the hands of the astonished dealer, I proceeded to fulfil my intention of passing the night in riding in the Champs Élysées. As I rode by the count's house, I perceived a light in one of the windows, and fancied I saw the shadow of his figure moving behind the curtain. Now, Valentine, I firmly believe that he knew of my wish to possess this horse, and that he lost expressly to give me the means of procuring him. My dear Maximilian, you are really too fanciful; you will not love even me long. A man who accustoms himself to live in such a world of poetry and imagination must find far too little excitement in a common, everyday sort of attachment such as ours. But they are calling me, do you hear?" "Ah, Valentine," said Maximilian, "give me but one finger through this opening in the grating, one finger, the tiniest finger of all, that I may have the happiness of kissing it." "Maximilian, we said we would be to each other as two voices, two shadows." "As you will, Valentine." "Shall you be happy if I do what you wish?" "Oh, yes!" Valentine mounted on a bench, and passed not only her finger but her whole hand through the opening. Maximilian uttered a cry of delight, and springing forward, seized the hand extended towards him, and imprinted on it a fervent and impassioned kiss. The little hand was then immediately withdrawn, and the young man saw Valentine hurrying toward the house, as though she were almost terrified at her own sensations. Chapter 57. Chapter 58 of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 58. Monsieur Noirtier de Villefort. We will now relate what was passing in the house of the king's attorney after the departure of Madame Danglars and her daughter, and during the time of the conversation between Maximilian and Valentine, which we have just detailed. M. de Villefort entered his father's room, followed by Madame de Villefort. Both of the visitors, after saluting the old man, and speaking to Barrois, a faithful servant who had been 25 years in his service, took their places on either side of the paralytic. M. Noirtier was sitting in an armchair which moved upon casters, in which he was wheeled into the room in the morning, and in the same way drawn out again at night. He was placed before a large glass which reflected the whole apartment, and so, without any attempt to move, which would have been impossible, he could see all who entered the room, and everything which was going on around him. M. Noirtier, although almost as immovable as a corpse, looked at the newcomers with a quick and intelligent expression, perceiving at once by their ceremonious courtesy that they were come on business of an unexpected and official character. Sight and hearing were the only senses remaining, and they, like two solitary sparks, remained to animate the miserable body, which seemed fit for nothing but the grave. It was only, however, by means of one of these senses that he could reveal the thoughts and feelings that still occupied his mind, and the look by which he gave expression to his inner life was like the distant gleam of a candle which a traveller sees by night across some desert place, and knows that a living being dwells beyond the silence and obscurity. Noirtier's hair was long and white, and flowed over his shoulders, while in his eyes, shaded by thick black lashes, was concentrated, as it often happens with an organ which is used to the exclusion of the others, all the activity, address, force, and intelligence which were formerly diffused over his whole body. And so, although the movement of the arm, the sound of the voice, and the agility of the body were wanting, the speaking eye sufficed for all. He commanded with it; it was the medium through which his thanks were conveyed. In short, his whole appearance produced on the mind the impression of a corpse with living eyes, and nothing could be more startling than to observe the expression of anger or joy suddenly lighting up these organs, while the rest of the rigid and marble-like features were utterly deprived of the power of participation. Three persons only could understand this language of the poor paralytic. These were Villefort, Valentine, and the old servant of whom we have already spoken. But as Villefort saw his father but seldom, and then only when absolutely obliged, and as he never took any pains to please or gratify him when he was there, all the old man's happiness was centred in his granddaughter. Valentine, by means of her love, her patience, and her devotion, had learned to read in Noirtier's looks all the varied feelings which were passing in his mind. To this dumb language, which was so unintelligible to others, she answered by throwing her whole soul into the expression of her countenance, and in this manner were the conversations sustained between the blooming girl and the helpless invalid, whose body could scarcely be called a living one, but who, nevertheless, possessed a fund of knowledge and penetration united with a will as powerful as ever, although clogged by a body rendered utterly incapable of obeying its impulses. Valentine had solved the problem, and was able easily to understand his thoughts and to convey her own in return; and through her untiring and devoted assiduity, it was seldom that, in the ordinary transactions of everyday life, she failed to anticipate the wishes of the living, thinking mind, or the wants of an almost inanimate body. As to the servant, he had, as we have said, been with his master for 25 years; therefore he knew all his habits, and it was seldom that Noirtier found it necessary to ask for anything, so prompt was he in administering to all the necessities of the invalid. Villefort did not need the help of either Valentine or the domestic in order to carry on with his father the strange conversation which he was about to begin. As we have said, he perfectly understood the old man's vocabulary, and if he did not use it more often, it was only indifference and ennui which prevented him from so doing. He therefore allowed Valentine to go into the garden, sent away Barrois, and, after having seated himself at his father's right hand, while Madame de Villefort placed herself on the left, he addressed him thus: "I trust you will not be displeased, sir, that Valentine has not come with us, or that I dismissed Barrois, for our conference will be one which could not with propriety be carried on in the presence of either. Madame de Villefort and I have a communication to make to you." Noirtier's face remained perfectly passive during this long preamble, while, on the contrary, Villefort's eye was endeavoring to penetrate into the inmost recesses of the old man's heart. "This communication," continued the procureur, in that cold and decisive tone which seemed at once to preclude all discussion, "will, we are sure, meet with your approbation." The eye of the invalid still retained that vacancy of expression which prevented his son from obtaining any knowledge of the feelings which were passing in his mind. He listened, nothing more. "Sir," resumed Villefort, "we are thinking of marrying Valentine." Had the old man's face been molded in wax, it could not have shown less emotion at this news than was now to be traced there. "The marriage will take place in less than 3 months," said Villefort. Noirtier's eyes still retained its inanimate expression. Madame de Villefort now took her part in the conversation, and added, "We thought this news would possess an interest for you, sir, who have always entertained a great affection for Valentine. It therefore only now remains for us to tell you the name of the young man for whom she is destined. It is one of the most desirable connections which could possibly be formed. He possesses fortune, a high rank in society, and every personal qualification likely to render Valentine supremely happy. His name, moreover, cannot be wholly unknown to you. It is M. Franz de Quesnel, Baron d'Épinay." While his wife was speaking, Villefort had narrowly watched the old man's countenance. When Madame de Villefort pronounced the name of Franz, the pupil of M. Noirtier's eye began to dilate, and his eyelids trembled with the same movement that may be perceived on the lips of an individual about to speak, and he darted a lightning glance at Madame de Villefort and his son. The procureur, who knew the political hatred which had formerly existed between M. Noirtier and the elder d'Épinay, well understood the agitation and anger which the announcement had produced; but, feigning not to perceive either, he immediately resumed the narrative begun by his wife. "Sir," said he, You are aware that Valentine is about to enter her 19th year, which renders it important that she should lose no time in forming a suitable alliance. Nevertheless, you have not been forgotten in our plans, and we have fully ascertained beforehand that Valentine's future husband will consent, not to live in this house, for that might not be pleasant for the young people, but that you should live with them, so that you and Valentine, who are so attached to each other, would not be separated, and you would be able to pursue exactly the same course of life which you have hitherto done, and thus, instead of losing, you will be a gainer by the change, as it will secure you 2 children instead of 1 to watch over and comfort you." Noirtier's look was furious. It was very evident that something desperate was passing in the old man's mind, for a cry of anger and grief rose in his throat, and not being able to find vent in utterance, appeared almost to choke him, for his face and lips turned quite purple with the struggle. Villefort quietly opened a window, saying, "It is very warm, and the heat affects M. Noirtier." He then returned to his place, but did not sit down. "This marriage," added Madame de Villefort, "is quite agreeable to the wishes of M. d'Épinay and his family. Besides, he had no relations nearer than an uncle and aunt, his mother having died at his birth, and his father having been assassinated in 1815, that is to say, when he was but 2 years old. It naturally followed that the child was permitted to choose his own pursuits, and he has, therefore, seldom acknowledged any other authority but that of his own will." "That assassination was a mysterious affair," said Villefort, "and the perpetrators have hitherto escaped detection, although suspicion has fallen on the head of more than one person." Noirtier made such an effort that his lips expanded into a smile. "Now," continued Villefort, "those to whom the guilt really belongs, by whom the crime was committed, on whose heads the justice of man may probably descend here, and the certain judgment of God hereafter, would rejoice in the opportunity thus afforded of bestowing such a peace offering as Valentine on the son of him whose life they so ruthlessly destroyed." Noirtier had succeeded in mastering his emotion, more than could have been deemed possible with such an enfeebled and shattered frame. "Yes, I understand," was the reply contained in his look, and this look expressed a feeling of strong indignation, mixed with profound contempt. Villefort fully understood his father's meaning, and answered by a slight shrug of his shoulders. He then motioned to his wife to take leave. "Now, sir," said Madame de Villefort, "I must bid you farewell. Would you like me to send Edward to you for a short time?" It had been agreed that the old man should express his approbation by closing his eyes, his refusal by winking them several times, and if he had some desire or feelings to express, he raised them to heaven. If he wanted Valentine, he closed his right eye only, and if Barrois, the left. At Madame de Villefort's proposition, he instantly winked his eyes. Provoked by a complete refusal, she bit her lip and said, "Then shall I send Valentine to you?" The old man closed his eyes eagerly, thereby intimating that such was his wish. M. and Madame de Villefort bowed and left the room, giving orders that Valentine should be summoned to her grandfather's presence, and feeling sure that she would have much to do to restore calmness to the perturbed spirit of the invalid. Valentine, with a color still heightened by emotion, entered the room just after her parents had quitted it. One look was sufficient to tell her that her grandfather was suffering, and that there was much on his mind which he was wishing to communicate to her. "Dear grandpapa," cried she, "what has happened? They have vexed you, and you are angry?" The paralytic closed his eyes in token of assent. "Who has displeased you? Is it my father?" "No." "Madame de Villefort?" "No." "Me?" The former sign was repeated. "Are you displeased with me?" cried Valentine in astonishment. M. Noirtier again closed his eyes. "And what have I done, dear grandpapa, that you should be angry with me?" cried Valentine. There was no answer, and she continued, "I have not seen you all day. Has anyone been speaking to you against me?" "Yes," said the old man's look with eagerness. "Let me think a moment. I do assure you, grandpapa. Ah, M. and Madame de Villefort have just left this room, have they not?" "Yes." "And it was they who told you something which made you angry. What was it, then? May I go and ask them that I may have the opportunity of making my peace with you?" "No, no," said Noirtier's look. "Ah, you frighten me. What can they have said?" And she again tried to think what it could be. "Ah, I know," she said, lowering her voice and going close to the old man. "They have been speaking of my marriage, have they not?" "Yes," replied the angry look. "I understand. You are displeased at the silence I have preserved on the subject. The reason of it was, that they had insisted on my keeping the matter a secret, and begged me not to tell you anything of it. They did not even acquaint me with their intentions, and I only discovered them by chance. That is why I have been so reserved with you, dear grandpapa. Pray forgive me." But there was no look calculated to reassure her. All it seemed to say was, "It is not only your reserve which afflicts me." "What is it, then?" asked the young girl. "Perhaps you think I shall abandon you, dear grandpapa, and that I shall forget you when I am married?" "No." "They told you, then, that M. d'Épinay consented to our all living together?" "Yes." "Then why are you still vexed and grieved?" The old man's eyes beamed with an expression of gentle affection. "Yes, I understand," said Valentine; "it is because you love me." The old man assented. "And you are afraid I shall be unhappy?" "Yes." "You do not like M. Franz?" The eyes repeated several times, "No, no, no." "Then you are vexed with the engagement?" "Yes." "Well, listen," said Valentine, throwing herself on her knees, and putting her arm round her grandfather's neck. "I am vexed too, for I do not love M. Franz d'Épinay." An expression of intense joy illuminated the old man's eyes. "When I wished to retire into a convent, you remember how angry you were with me?" A tear trembled in the eye of the invalid. "Well," continued Valentine, "the reason of my proposing it was that I might escape this hateful marriage, which drives me to despair." Noirtier's breathing came thick and short. "Then the idea of this marriage really grieves you too? Ah, if you could but help me, if we could both together defeat their plan! But you are unable to oppose them. You, whose mind is so quick and whose will is so firm, are nevertheless as weak and unequal to the contest as I am myself. Alas, you, who would have been such a powerful protector to me in the days of your health and strength, can now only sympathize in my joys and sorrows, without being able to take any active part in them. However, this is much, and calls for gratitude, and heaven has not taken away all my blessings when it leaves me your sympathy and kindness." At these words there appeared in Noirtier's eyes an expression of such deep meaning that the young girl thought she could read these words there. "You are mistaken; I can still do much for you." "Do you think you can help me, dear grandpapa?" said Valentine. "Yes." Noirtier raised his eyes. It was the sign agreed on between him and Valentine when he wanted anything. "What is it you want, dear grandpapa?" said Valentine. And she endeavored to recall to mind all the things which he would be likely to need, and as the ideas presented themselves to her mind, she repeated them aloud; then, finding that all her efforts elicited nothing but a constant "no," she said, "Come, since this plan does not answer, I will have recourse to another." She then recited all the letters from the alphabet, from A down to N. When she arrived at that letter, the paralytic made her understand that she had spoken the initial letter of the thing he wanted. "Ah," said Valentine, "the thing you desire begins with the letter N. It is with N that we have to do, then. Well, let me see, what can you want that begins with N? N-A, N-E, N-I, N-O? Yes, yes, yes," said the old man's eye. "Ah, it is no, then?" "Yes." Valentine fetched a dictionary, which she placed on a desk before Noirtier. She opened it, and seeing that the old man's eye was thoroughly fixed on its pages, she ran her finger quickly up and down the columns. During the 6 years which had passed since Noirtier first fell into this sad state, Valentine's powers of invention had been too often put to the test not to render her expert in devising expedients for gaining a knowledge of his wishes, and the constant practice had so perfected her in the art that she guessed the old man's meaning as quickly as if he himself had been able to seek for what he wanted. At the word notary, Noirtier made a sign for her to stop. "Notary," she said. "Do you want a notary, dear grandpapa?" The old man again signified that it was a notary he desired. "You would wish a notary to be sent for, then?" said Valentine. "Yes." "Shall my father be informed of your wish?" "Yes." "Do you wish the notary to be sent for immediately?" "Yes." "Then they shall go for him directly, dear grandpapa. Is that all you want?" "Yes." Valentine rang the bell, and ordered the servant to tell M. or Madame de Villefort that they were requested to come to M. Noirtier's room. "Are you satisfied now?" inquired Valentine. "Yes." "I am sure you are. It is not very difficult to discover that." And the young girl smiled on her grandfather as if he had been a child. M. de Villefort entered, followed by Barrois. "What do you want me for, sir?" demanded he of the paralytic. "Sir," said Valentine, "my grandfather wishes for a notary." At this strange and unexpected demand, M. de Villefort and his father exchanged looks. "Yes," motioned the latter, with a firmness which seemed to declare that with the help of Valentine and his old servant, who both knew what his wishes were, he was quite prepared to maintain the contest. "Do you wish for a notary?" asked Villefort. "Yes." "What to do?" Noirtier made no answer. "What do you want with a notary?" again repeated Villefort. The invalid's eye remained fixed, by which expression he intended to intimate that his resolution was unalterable. "Is it to do us some ill turn? Do you think it is worth while?" said Villefort. "Still," said Barrois, with the freedom and fidelity of an old servant, "if M. Noirtier asks for a notary, I suppose he really wishes for a notary. Therefore I shall go at once and fetch one." Barrois acknowledged no master but Noirtier, and never allowed his desires in any way to be contradicted. "Yes, I do want a notary," motioned the old man, shutting his eye with a look of defiance, which seemed to say, "And I should like to see the person who dares to refuse my request." "You shall have a notary as you absolutely wish for one, sir," said Villefort; "but I shall explain to him your state of health, and make excuses for you, for the scene cannot fail of being a most ridiculous one." "Never mind that," said Barrois, "I shall go and fetch a notary nevertheless." And the old servant departed triumphantly on his mission. Chapter 58.
Chapter 59 of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wild Alaska. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 59. The Will. As soon as Barrois had left the room, Noirtier looked at Valentine with a malicious expression that said many things. The young girl perfectly understood the look, and so did Villefort, for his countenance became clouded, and he knitted his eyebrows angrily. He took a seat, and quietly awaited the arrival of the notary. Noirtier saw him seat himself with an appearance of perfect indifference, at the same time giving a side look at Valentine, which made her understand that she also was to remain in the room. 3/4 of an hour after, Barrois returned, bringing the notary with him. "Sir," said Villefort, after the first salutations were over, "you were sent by M. Noirtier, whom you see here. All his limbs have become completely paralyzed. He has lost his voice also, and we ourselves find much trouble in endeavoring to catch some fragments of his meaning." Noirtier cast an appealing look on Valentine, which look was at once so earnest and imperative that she answered immediately. "Sir," said she, "I perfectly understand my grandfather's meaning at all times." "That is quite true," said Barrois, "and that is what I told the gentleman as we walked along." "Permit me," said the notary, turning first to Villefort and then to Valentine, "permit me to state that the case in question is just one of those in which a public officer like myself cannot proceed to act without thereby incurring a dangerous responsibility. The first thing necessary to render an act valid is, that the notary should be thoroughly convinced that he has faithfully interpreted the will and wishes of the person dictating the act. Now, I cannot be sure of the approbation or disapprobation of a client who cannot speak, and as the object of his desire or his repugnance cannot be clearly proved to me on account of his want of speech, my services here would be quite useless and cannot be legally exercised. The notary then prepared to retire. An imperceptible smile of triumph was expressed on the lips of the procureur. Noirtier looked at Valentine with an expression so full of grief that she attested the departure of the notary. "Sir," said she, "the language which I speak with my grandfather may be easily learnt, and I can teach you in a few minutes to understand it almost as well as I can myself. Will you tell me what you require in order to set your conscience quite at ease on the subject?" "In order to render an act valid, I must be certain of the approbation or disapprobation of my client. Illness of body would not affect the validity of the deed, but sanity of mind is absolutely requisite. Well, sir, by the help of 2 signs, which I will acquaint you, presently you may ascertain with perfect certainty that my grandfather is still in the full possession of all of his mental faculties. M. Noirtier, being deprived of voice and motion, is accustomed to convey his meaning by closing his eyes when he wishes to signify yes, and to wink when he means no. You now know quite enough to enable you to converse with M. Noirtier. Try." Noirtier gave Valentine such a look of tenderness and gratitude that it was comprehended even by the notary himself. "You have heard and understood what your granddaughter has been saying, sir, have you?" asked the notary. Noirtier closed his eyes. "And you approve of what she said? That is to say, you declare that the signs which she mentioned are really those by means of which you are accustomed to convey your thoughts?" "Yes." "It was you who sent for me?" "Yes." "To make your will?" "Yes." "And you do not wish me to go away without fulfilling your original intentions?" The old man winked violently. "Well, sir," said the young girl, "do you understand now? And is your conscience perfectly at rest on the subject?" But before the notary could answer, Villefort had drawn him aside. "Sir," said he, "do you suppose for a moment that a man can sustain a physical shock such as M. Noirtier has received without any detriment to his mental faculties?" "It is not exactly that, sir," said the notary, "which makes me uneasy, but the difficulty will be in wording his thoughts and intentions so as to be able to get his answers." "You must see that to be an utter impossibility," said Villefort. Valentine and the old man heard this conversation, and Noirtier fixed his eyes so earnestly on Valentine that she felt bound to answer the look. "Sir," said she, "that need not make you uneasy, however difficult it may at first sight to appear to be. I can discover and explain to you my grandfather's thoughts, so as to put an end to all your doubts and fears on the subject. I have now been 6 years with M. Noirtier, and let him tell you if ever once, during that time, he has entertained a thought which he was unable to make me understand." "No," sighed the old man. "Let us try what we can do, then," said the notary. "You accept this young lady as your interpreter, M. Noirtier?" "Yes." "Well, sir, what do you require of me, and what document is it that you wish to be drawn up?" Valentine named all of the letters of the alphabet until she came to W. At this letter the eloquent eye of Noirtier gave her notice that she was to stop. "It is very evident that it is the letter W which M. Noirtier wants," said the notary. "Wait," said Valentine, and turning to her grandfather she repeated, "Wa, we, we." The old man stopped her at the last syllable. Valentine then took the dictionary, and the notary watched her while she turned over the pages. She passed her finger slowly down the columns, and when she came to the word will, M. Noirtier's eyes bade her to stop. "Will," said the notary. "It is very evident that M. Noirtier is desirous of making his will." "Yes, yes, yes," motioned the invalid. "Really, sir, you must allow that this is most extraordinary," said the astonished notary, turning to M. de Villefort. "Yes," said the procureur, "and I think the will promises to be yet more extraordinary, for I cannot see how it is to be drawn up without the intervention of Valentine, and she may, perhaps, be considered as too much interested in its contents to allow of her being a suitable interpreter of the obscure and ill-defined wishes of her grandfather." "No, no, no," replied the eye of the paralytic. "What," said Villefort, "do you mean to say that Valentine is not interested in your will?" "No." "Sir," said the notary, whose interest had been greatly excited, and who had resolved on publishing far and wide the account of this extraordinary and picturesque scene, "what appeared so impossible to me an hour ago has now become quite easy and practicable, and this may be a perfectly valid will, provided it be read in the presence of 7 witnesses, approved by the testator, and sealed by the notary in the presence of the witnesses. As to the time, it will not require very much more than the generality of wills. There are certain forms necessary to be gone through, and which are always the same. As to the details, the greater part will be furnished afterward by the state, in which we find the affairs of the testator, and by you yourself, who, having the management of them, can doubtless give full information on the subject. But besides all this, in order that the instrument may not be contested, I am anxious to give it the greatest possible authenticity. Therefore, one of my colleagues will help me, and, contrary to custom, will assist in the dictation of the testament. Are you satisfied, sir?" continued the notary, addressing the old man. "Yes," looked the invalid, his eye beaming with delight at the ready interpretation of his meaning. "What is he going to do?" thought Villefort, whose position demanded much reserve, but who was longing to know what his father's intentions were. He left the room to give orders for another notary to be sent, but Barrois, who had heard all that had passed, had guessed his master's wishes, and had already gone to fetch one. The procureur then told his wife to come up. In the course of a quarter of an hour everyone had assembled in the chamber of the paralytic. The second notary had also arrived. A few words sufficed for a mutual understanding between the 2 officers of the law. They read to Noirtier the formal copy of a will, in order to give him an idea of the terms in which documents are generally couched. Then, in order to test the capacity of the testator, the first notary said, turning towards him, "When an individual makes his will, it is generally in favor or in prejudice of some person." "Yes." "Have you an exact idea of the amount of your fortune?" "Yes." "I will name to you several sums which will increase by gradation. You will stop me when I reach the one representing the amount of your own possessions." "Yes." There was a kind of solemnity in this interrogation. Never had the struggle between mind and matter been more apparent than now, and if it was not a sublime, it was at least a curious spectacle. They had formed a circle round the invalid. The second notary was sitting at a table prepared for writing, and his colleague was standing before the testator in the act of interrogating him on the subject to which we have alluded. "Your fortune exceeds 300,000 francs, does it not?" asked he. Noirtier made a sign that it did. "Do you possess 400,000 francs?" inquired the notary. Noirtier's eyes remained immovable. 500,000. The same expression continued. 600,000. 700,000. 800,000. 900,000. Noirtier stopped him at the last named sum. "You are then in possession of 900,000 francs?" asked the notary. "Yes." "In landed property?" "No." "In stock?" "Yes." "The stock is in your own hands?" The look which M. Noirtier cast on Barrois showed that there was something wanting which he knew where to find. The old servant left the room, and presently returned, bringing with him a small casket. "Do you permit us to open this casket?" asked the notary. Noirtier gave his assent. They opened it, and found 900,000 francs in bank script. The first notary handed over each note as he examined it to his colleague. The total amount was found to be as M. Noirtier had stated. It is all as he had said. It is very evident that the mind still retains its full force and vigor. Then returning toward the paralytic, he said, "You possess then 900,000 francs of capital, which, according to the manner in which you have invested it, ought to bring in an income of about 40,000 livres." "Yes." "To whom do you desire to leave this fortune?" "Oh," said Madame de Villefort, "there is not much doubt on the subject. M. Noirtier tenderly loves his granddaughter, Mademoiselle de Villefort. It is she who has nursed and tended him for 6 years, and has, by her devoted attention, fully secured the affection, I had almost said the gratitude, of her grandfather, and it is but just that she should reap the fruit of her devotion." The eye of Noirtier clearly showed by its expression that he was not deceived by the false assent given by Madame de Villefort's words and manner to the motives which she supposed him to entertain. "Is it then to Mademoiselle Valentine de Villefort that you leave these 900,000 francs?" demanded the notary. Thinking he had only to insert this clause, but waiting first for the assent of Noirtier, which it was necessary should be given before all the witnesses of the singular scene. Valentine, when her name was made the subject of discussion, had stepped back to escape unpleasant observation. Her eyes were cast down. She was crying. The old man looked at her for an instant with an expression of the deepest tenderness. Then, turning towards the notary, he significantly winked his eye in token of dissent. "What," said the notary, "do you not intend making Mademoiselle Valentine de Villefort your residuary legatee?" "No." "You are not making any mistake, are you?" said the notary. "You really mean to declare that such is not your intention?" "No," repeated Noirtier, "no." Valentine raised her head, struck dumb with astonishment. It was not so much the conviction that she was disinherited that caused her grief, but her total inability to account for the feelings which had provoked her grandfather to such an act. But Noirtier looked at her with so much affectionate tenderness that she exclaimed, "Oh, grandpapa, I see now that it is only your fortune of which you deprive me. You still leave me the love which I have always enjoyed." "Ah, yes, most assuredly," said the eyes of the paralytic, for he closed them with an expression which Valentine could not mistake. Thank you," murmured she. The old man's declaration that Valentine was not the destined inheritor of his fortune had excited the hopes of Madame de Villefort. She gradually approached the invalid and said, "Then doubtless, dear M. Noirtier, you intend leaving your fortune to your grandson, Edward de Villefort." The winking of the eyes, which assured this speech was most decided and terrible, and expressed a feeling almost amounting to hatred. "No," said the notary. "Then perhaps it is to your son, M. de Villefort." "No." The two notaries looked at each other in mute astonishment and inquiry as to what were the real intentions of the testator. Villefort and his wife both grew red, one from shame, the other from anger. "What have we all done, then, dear grandpapa?" said Valentine. "You no longer seem to love any of us." The old man's eyes passed rapidly from Villefort to his wife, and rested on Valentine with a look of unutterable fondness. "Well," said she, "if you love me, grandpapa, try and bring that love to bear upon your actions at this present moment. You know me well enough to be quite sure that I have never thought of your fortune, and besides, they say I am already rich in right of my mother, too rich even. Explain yourself, then." Noirtier fixed his intelligent eyes on Valentine's hand. My hand? Said she. Yes. Her hand! Exclaimed everyone. Oh, gentlemen, you see it is all useless, and that my father's mind is really impaired, said Villefort. Ah, cried Valentine suddenly, I understand. It is my marriage, you mean. Is it not, dear grandpapa? Yes, 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 sighed the paralytic, casting on Valentine a look of joyful gratitude for having guessed his meaning. You're angry with us all on account of this marriage, are you not? Yes. Really, this is too absurd, said Villefort. Excuse me, sir, replied the notary. On the contrary, the meaning of M. Noirtier is quite evident to me, and I can quite easily connect the train of ideas passing in his mind. You do not wish me to marry M. Franz d'Épinay? Observed Valentine. I do not wish it, said the eye of her grandfather. And you disinherit your granddaughter, continued the notary, because she has contracted an engagement contrary to your wishes? Yes. So that, but for this marriage, she would have been your heir? Yes. There was a profound silence. The two notaries were holding a consultation as to the best means of proceeding with the affair. Valentine was looking at her grandfather with a smile of intense gratitude, and Villefort was biting his lips with vexation, while Madame de Villefort could not succeed in repressing an inward feeling of joy, which, in spite of herself, appeared in her whole countenance. But, said Villefort, who was the first to break the silence, I consider that I am the best judge of the propriety of the marriage in question. I am the only person possessing the right to dispose of my daughter's hand. It is my wish that she should marry M. Franz d'Épinay, and she shall marry him. Valentine sank, weeping, into a chair. Sir, said the notary, how do you intend disposing of your fortune in case Mademoiselle de Villefort still determines on marrying M. Franz? The old man gave no answer. You will, of course, dispose of it in some way or another? Yes. In favor of some member of your family? No. Do you intend devoting it to charitable purposes, then? Pursued the notary. Yes. But, said the notary, you are aware that the law does not allow a son to be entirely deprived of his patrimony. Yes. You only intend, then, to dispose of that part of your fortune which the law allows you to subtract from the inheritance of your son. Noirtier made no answer. Do you still wish to dispose of all? Yes. But they will contest the will after your death. No. My father knows me, replied Villefort. He is quite sure that his wishes will be held sacred by me. Besides, he understands that in my position I cannot plead against the poor. The eye of Noirtier beamed with triumph. What do you decide on, sir? Asked the notary of Villefort. Nothing, sir. It is a resolution which my father has taken, and I know he never alters his mind. I am quite resigned. These 900,000 francs will go out of the family in order to enrich some hospital, but it is ridiculous thus to yield to the caprices of an old man, and I shall therefore act according to my conscience. Having said this, Villefort quitted the room with his wife, leaving his father at liberty to do as he pleased. The same day the will was made, the witnesses were brought. It was approved by the old man, sealed in the presence of all, and given in charge to M. de Champs, the family notary. End of chapter 59. This recording by Wild Alaska. Anchorage, Alaska, May 2012.
Chapter 60 of The Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Arlene Stebbins. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 60. The Telegraph. Monsieur and Madame de Villefort found on their return that the Count of Monte Cristo, who had come to visit them in their absence, had been ushered into the drawing-room and was still awaiting them there. Madame de Villefort, who had not yet sufficiently recovered from her late emotion to allow of her entertaining visitors so immediately, retired to her bedroom, while the procureur, who could better depend upon himself, proceeded at once to the salon. Although M. de Villefort flattered himself that, to all outward view, he had completely masked the feelings which were passing in his mind, he did not know that the cloud was still lowering on his brow, so much so that the count, whose smile was radiant, immediately noticed his sombre and thoughtful air. "Ma foi," said Monte Cristo after the first compliments were over, "what is the matter with you, M. de Villefort? Have I arrived at the moment when you were drawing up an indictment for a capital crime?" Villefort tried to smile. "No, count," he replied, "I am the only victim in this case. It is I who lose my cause, and it is ill luck, obstinacy, and folly which have caused it to be decided against me." "To what do you refer?" said Monte Cristo, with a well-feigned interest. "Have you really met with some great misfortune?" "Oh, no, monsieur," said Villefort, with a bitter smile; "it is only a loss of money which I have sustained, nothing worth mentioning, I assure you." "True," said Monte Cristo, "the loss of a sum of money becomes almost immaterial with a fortune such as you possess, and to one of your philosophic spirit." "It is not so much the loss of money that vexes me," said Villefort, "though, after all, 900,000 francs are worth regretting; but I am the more annoyed with this fate, chance, or whatever you please to call the power which has destroyed my hopes and my fortune, and may blast the prospects of my child also, as it is all occasioned by an old man relapsed into second childhood." "What do you say?" said the count. 900,000 francs? It is indeed a sum which might be regretted even by a philosopher. And who is the cause of all this annoyance?" "My father, as I told you." "Monsieur Noirtier? But I thought you told me he had become entirely paralyzed, and that all his faculties were completely destroyed." "Yes, his bodily faculties, for he can neither move nor speak. Nevertheless, he thinks, acts, and wills in the manner I have described. I left him about 5 minutes ago, and he is now occupied in dictating his will to 2 notaries." "But to do this he must have spoken." "He has done better than that, he has made himself understood." "How was such a thing possible?" "By the help of his eyes, which are still full of life, and, as you perceive, possess the power of inflicting mortal injury." "My dear," said Madame de Villefort, who had just entered the room, "perhaps you exaggerate the evil." "Good morning, madame," said the count, bowing. Madame de Villefort acknowledged the salutation with one of her most gracious smiles. "What is this that M. de Villefort has been telling me?" demanded Monte Cristo, "and what incomprehensible misfortune—" "Incomprehensible is not the word," interrupted the procureur, shrugging his shoulders; "it is an old man's caprice." "And there is no means of making him revoke his decision?" "Yes," said Madame de Villefort, "and it is still entirely in the power of my husband to cause the will, which is now in prejudice of Valentine, to be altered in her favor." The count, who perceived that M. and Madame de Villefort were beginning to speak in parables, appeared to pay no attention to the conversation, and feigned to be busily engaged in watching Edward, who was mischievously pouring some ink into the bird's water-glass. "My dear," said Villefort, in answer to his wife, "you know I have never been accustomed to play the patriarch in my family, nor have I ever considered the fate of a universe was to be decided by my nod. Nevertheless, it is necessary that my will should be respected in my family, and that the folly of an old man and the caprice of a child should not be allowed to overturn a project which I have entertained for so many years. The Baron d'Épinay was my friend, as you know, and an alliance with his son is the most suitable thing that could possibly be arranged." "Do you think," said Madame de Villefort, "that Valentine is in league with him? She has always been opposed to this marriage, and I should not be at all surprised if what we have just seen and heard is nothing but the execution of a plan concerted between them." Madame, said Villefort, believe me, a fortune of 900,000 francs is not so easily renounced. She could, nevertheless, make up her mind to renounce the world, sir, since it is only about a year ago that she herself proposed entering a convent. Never mind, replied Villefort, I say that this marriage shall be consummated. Notwithstanding your father's wishes to the contrary, said Madame de Villefort, selecting a new point of attack, that is a serious thing. Monte Cristo, who pretended not to be listening, heard, however, every word that was said. Madame, replied Villefort, I can truly say that I have always entertained a high respect for my father, because to the natural feeling of relationship was added the consciousness of his moral superiority. The name of father is sacred in two senses. He should be reverenced as the author of our being, and as a master whom we ought to obey. But under the present circumstances I am justified in doubting the wisdom of an old man who, because he hated the father, vents his anger on the son. It would be ridiculous in me to regulate my conduct by such caprices. I shall still continue to preserve the same respect toward M. Noirtier. I will suffer without complaint the pecuniary deprivation to which he has subjected me, but I shall remain firm in my determination, and the world shall see which party has reason on his side. Consequently, I shall marry my daughter to the Baron Franz d'Épinay, because I consider it would be a proper and eligible match for her to make, and, in short, because I choose to bestow my daughter's hand on whomever I please. What? Said the count, the approbation of whose eye Villefort had frequently solicited during this speech. What? Do you say that M. Noirtier disinherits Mademoiselle de Villefort because she was going to marry M. le Baron Franz d'Épinay? Yes, sir, that is the reason, said Villefort, shrugging his shoulders. The apparent reason, at least, said Madame de Villefort. The real reason, madame, I can assure you. I know my father. But I want to know in what way M. d'Épinay can have displeased your father more than any other person. I believe I know M. Franz d'Épinay, said the count. Is he not the son of General de Quesnel, who was created Baron d'Épinay by Charles X? The same, said Villefort. Well, but he is a charming young man, according to my ideas. He is, which makes me believe that it is only an excuse of M. Noirtier to prevent his granddaughter marrying. Old men are always so selfish in their affection, said Madame de Villefort. But, said Monte Cristo, do you not know any cause for his hatred? Ah, ma foi, who is to know? Perhaps it is some political difference? My father and the Baron d'Épinay lived in the stormy times of which I only saw the ending, said Villefort. Was not your father a Bonapartist? asked Monte Cristo. I think I remember you told me something of that kind. My father has been a Jacobin more than anything else, said Villefort, carried by his emotion beyond the bounds of prudence, and the senator's robe which Napoleon cast on his shoulders served only to disguise the old man without in any degree changing him. When my father conspired, it was not for the emperor, it was against the Bourbons. For M. Noirtier possessed this peculiarity: he never projected any utopian schemes which could never be realized, but strove for possibilities, and he applied to the realization of those possibilities the terrible theories of the mountain, theories that never shrank from any means that were deemed necessary to bring about the desired result. Well, said Monte Cristo, it is just as I thought. It was politics which brought Noirtier and M. d'Épinay into personal contact. Although General d'Épinay served under Napoleon, did he not still retain royalist sentiments? And was he not the person who was assassinated one evening, leaving a Bonapartist meeting to which he had been invited on the supposition that he favored the cause of the emperor? Villefort looked at the count almost with terror. Am I mistaken, then? said Monte Cristo. No, sir, the facts are precisely what you have stated, said Madame de Villefort, and it was to prevent the renewal of old feuds that M. de Villefort formed the idea of uniting in the bonds of affection the two children of these inveterate enemies. It was a sublime and charitable thought, said Monte Cristo, and the whole world should applaud it. It would be noble to see Mademoiselle Noirtier de Villefort assuming the title of Madame France d'Épinay." Villefort shuddered and looked at Monte Cristo as if he wished to read in his countenance the real feelings which had dictated the words he had just uttered. But the count completely baffled the procureur, and prevented him from discovering anything beneath the never varying smile he was so constantly in the habit of assuming. "Although," said Villefort, "it will be a serious thing for Valentine to lose her grandfather's fortune, I do not think that M. d'Épinay will be frightened at this pecuniary loss. He will, perhaps, hold me in greater esteem than the money itself, seeing that I sacrifice everything in order to keep my word with him. Besides, he knows that Valentine is rich in right of her mother, and that she will in all probability inherit the fortune of M. and Madame de Saint Méran, her mother's parents, who both love her tenderly." "And who are fully as well worth loving and tending as M. Noirtier," said Madame de Villefort. "Besides, they are to come to Paris in about a month, and Valentine, after the affront she has received, need not consider it necessary to continue to bury herself alive by being shut up with M. Noirtier." The count listened with satisfaction to this tale of wounded self-love and defeated ambition. "But it seems to me," said Monte Cristo, "and I must begin by asking your pardon for what I am about to say, that if M. Noirtier disinherits Mademoiselle de Villefort because she is going to marry a man whose father he detested, he cannot have the same cause of complaint against this dear Edward." "True," said Madame de Villefort, with an intonation of voice which it is impossible to describe. "Is it not unjust, shamefully unjust? Poor Edward is as much M. Noirtier's grandchild as Valentine, and yet, if she had not been going to marry M. France, M. Noirtier would have left her all his money, and supposing Valentine to be disinherited by her grandfather, she will still be 3 times richer than he." The count listened and said no more. "Count," said Villefort, "we will not entertain you any longer with our family misfortunes. It is true that my patrimony will go to endow charitable institutions, and my father will have deprived me of my lawful inheritance without reason for doing so; but I shall have the satisfaction of knowing that I have acted like a man of sense and feeling. M. d'Épinay, to whom I had promised the interest of this sum, shall receive it, even if I endure the most cruel privations." "However," said Madame de Villefort, returning to the one idea which incessantly occupied her mind, "perhaps it would be better to explain this unlucky affair to M. d'Épinay, in order to give him the opportunity of himself renouncing his claim to the hand of Mademoiselle de Villefort." "Ah, that would be a great pity," said Villefort. "A great pity," said Monte Cristo. "Undoubtedly," said Villefort, moderating the tones of his voice, "a marriage once concerted and then broken off throws a sort of discredit upon a young lady. Then again, the old reports, which I was so anxious to put an end to, will instantly gain ground. No, it will all go well. M. d'Épinay, if he is an honorable man, will consider himself more than ever pledged to Mademoiselle de Villefort, unless he were actuated by a decided feeling of avarice, but that is impossible." "I agree with M. de Villefort," said Monte Cristo, fixing his eyes on Madame de Villefort, "and if I were sufficiently intimate with him to allow of giving my advice, I would persuade him, since I have been told M. d'Épinay is coming back, to settle this affair once beyond all possibility of revocation. I will answer for the success of a project which will reflect so much honor on M. de Villefort." The procureur arose, delighted with the proposition, but his wife slightly changed color. "Well, that is all I wanted, and I will be guided by a counselor such as you are," said he, extending his hand to Monte Cristo. "Therefore, let everyone here look upon what has passed today as if it had not happened, and as though we had never thought of such a thing as a change in our original plans." "Sir," said the count, "the world, unjust as it is, will be pleased with your resolution. Your friends will be proud of you, and M. d'Épinay, even if he took Mademoiselle de Villefort without any dowry, which he will not do, would be delighted with the idea of entering a family which could make such sacrifices in order to keep a promise and fulfil a duty." At the conclusion of these words the count rose to depart. "Are you going to leave us, count?" said Madame de Villefort. I am sorry to say I must do so, madame. I only came to remind you of your promise for Saturday." "Did you fear we should forget it?" "You are very good, madame, but M. de Villefort has so many important and urgent occupations." "My husband has given me his word, sir," said Madame de Villefort. "You have just seen him resolve to keep it when he has everything to lose, and surely there is more reason for his doing so where he has everything to gain." "And," said Villefort, "is it at your house in the Champs Élysées that you receive visitors?" "No," said Monte Cristo, "which is precisely the reason which renders your kindness more meritorious. It is in the country." "In the country?" "Yes." "Where is it, then? Near Paris, is it not?" "Very near, only half a league from the barriers. It is at Auteuil." "At Auteuil?" said Villefort. "True. Madame de Villefort told me you lived at Auteuil, since it was to your house that she was taken. And in what part of Auteuil do you reside?" "Rue de la Fontaine." "Rue de la Fontaine!" exclaimed Villefort in an agitated tone. "At what number?" "Number 28." "Then," cried Villefort, "it was you who bought M. de Saint Méran's house." "Did it belong to M. de Saint Méran?" demanded Monte Cristo. "Yes," replied Madame de Villefort; "and would you believe it, count?" "Believe what?" "You think this house is pretty, do you not?" "I think it charming." "Well, my husband would never live in it." "Indeed," returned Monte Cristo, "that is a prejudice on your part, M. de Villefort, for which I am at quite a loss to account." "I do not like Auteuil, sir," said the procureur, making an evident effort to appear calm. "But I hope you will not carry your antipathy so far as to deprive me of the pleasure of your company, sir," said Monte Cristo. "No, count, I assure you I shall do my best," stammered Villefort. "Oh," said Monte Cristo, "I allow of no excuse. On Saturday, at 6 o'clock, I shall be expecting you, and if you fail to come, I shall think, for how do I know to the contrary, that this house, which has remained uninhabited for 20 years, must have some gloomy tradition or dreadful legend connected with it." "I will come, count, I will be sure to come," said Villefort eagerly. "Thank you," said Monte Cristo. "Now you must permit me to take my leave of you." "You said before that you were obliged to leave us, monsieur," said Madame de Villefort, "and you were about to tell us why when your attention was called to some other subject." "Indeed, madame," said Monte Cristo, "I scarcely know if I dare tell you where I am going." "Nonsense; say on." "Well, then, it is to see a thing on which I have sometimes mused for hours together." "What is it?" "A telegraph. So now I've told my secret." "A telegraph?" repeated Madame de Villefort. "Yes, a telegraph. I had often seen one placed at the end of a road on a hillock, and in the light of the sun its black arms, bending in every direction, always reminded me of the claws of an immense beetle, and I assure you it was never without emotion that I gazed on it, for I could not help thinking how wonderful it was that these various signs should be made to cleave the air with such precision as to convey to the distance of 300 leagues the ideas and wishes of a man sitting at a table on one end of the line, to another man similarly placed at the opposite extremity, and all this effected by a simple act of volition on the part of the sender of the message. I began to think of genii, sylphs, gnomes, in short, of all the ministers of the occult sciences, until I laughed aloud at the freaks of my own imagination. Now it never occurred to me to wish for a nearer inspection of these large insects with their long black claws, for I always feared to find under their stone wings some little human genius fagged to death with cabals, factions, and government intrigues. But one fine day I learned that the mover of this telegraph was only a poor wretch, hired for 1,200 francs a year, and employed all day not in studying the heavens like an astronomer, or in gazing on the water like an angler, or even in enjoying the privilege of observing the country around him, but all his monotonous life was passed in watching his white-bellied, black-clawed fellow insect 4 or 5 leagues distant from him. At length I felt a desire to study this living chrysalis more closely, and to endeavor to understand the secret part played by these insect actors when they occupy themselves simply with pulling different pieces of string. "And are you going there?" "I am." "What telegraph do you intend visiting?" That of the Home Department or of the Observatory? Oh, no, I should find there people who would force me to understand things of which I would prefer to remain ignorant, and who would try to explain to me, in spite of myself, a mystery which even they do not understand. Ma foi, I should wish to keep my illusions concerning insects unimpaired. It is quite enough to have those dissipated which I had formed of my fellow creatures. I shall, therefore, not visit either of these telegraphs, but one in the open country, where I shall find a good-natured simpleton who knows no more than the machine he is employed to work. You are a singular man, said Villefort. What line would you advise me to study? The one that is in most use just at this time. The Spanish one, you mean, I suppose? Yes. Should you like a letter to the minister that they might explain to you? No, said Monte Cristo. As I told you before, I do not wish to comprehend it. The moment I understand it, there will no longer exist a telegraph for me. It will be nothing more than a sign from M. du Châtel or from M. Montalivet, transmitted to the prefect of Bayonne, mystified by two Greek words, tele, graphein. It is the insect with black claws, and the awful word which I wish to retain in my imagination in all its purity and all its importance. Go then, for in the course of 2 hours it will be dark, and you will not be able to see anything. Ma foi, you frighten me. Which is the nearest way? Bayonne? Yes, the road to Bayonne. And afterwards the road to Châtillon? Yes. By the tower of Montlhéry, you mean? Yes. Thank you. Good-bye. On Saturday I will tell you my impressions concerning the telegraph. At the door the count was met by the two notaries who had just completed the act which was to disinherit Valentine, and who were leaving under the conviction of having done a thing which could not fail of redounding considerably to their credit. Chapter 60. Recording by Arlene Stebbins, Seattle, Washington.
Chapter 61 of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine G. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 61. How a Gardener may get rid of the Dormice. Not on the same night, as he had intended, but the next morning, the Count of Monte Cristo went out by the Barrier d'Enfants, taking the road to Orleans. Leaving the village of Linas, without stopping at the telegraph, which flourished its great bony arms as he passed, the count reached the tower of Montlhéry, situated, as everyone knows, upon the highest point of the plain of that name. At the foot of the hill the count dismounted and began to ascend by a little winding path, about 18 inches wide. When he reached the summit, he found himself stopped by a hedge, upon which green fruit had succeeded to red and white flowers. Monte Cristo looked for the entrance to the enclosure, and was not long in finding a little wooden gate, working on willow hinges, and fastened with a nail and string. The count soon mastered the mechanism, the gate opened, and he then found himself in a little garden, about 20 feet long by 12 wide, bounded on one side by part of the hedge, which contained the ingenious contrivance we have called a gate, and on the other by the old tower, covered with ivy and studded with wallflowers. No one would have thought, in looking at this old, weather-beaten, floral-decked tower, which might be likely to an elderly dame dressed up to receive her grandchildren at a birthday feast, that it would have been capable of telling strange things, if, in addition to the menacing ears which the proverb says all walls are provided with, it had also a voice. The garden was crossed by a path of red gravel, edged by a border of thick box, of many years' growth, and of a tone and colour that would have delighted the heart of Delacroix, our modern Rubens. This path was formed in the shape of the figure of 8, thus, in its windings, making a walk of 60 feet in a garden of only 20. Never had Flora, the fresh and smiling goddess of gardeners, been honoured with a purer or more scrupulous worship than that which was paid to her in this little enclosure. In fact, of the 20 rose trees which form the parterre, not only bore the mark of the slug, nor were there evidences anywhere of the clustering aphis which is so destructive to plants growing in a damp soil. And yet it was not because the damp had been excluded from the garden. The earth, black as soot, the thick foliage of the trees betrayed its presence. Besides, had natural humidity been wanting, it could have been immediately supplied by artificial means, thanks to a tank of water, sunk in one of the corners of the garden, and upon which were stationed a frog and a toad, who, from antipathy, no doubt, always remained on the two opposite sides of the basin. There was not a blade of grass to be seen in the paths, or a weed in the flower-beds. No fine lady ever trained and watered her geraniums, her cacti, and her rhododendrons with more pains than this hitherto unseen gardener bestowed upon his little enclosure. Monte Cristo stopped after having closed the gate, and fastened the string to the nail, and cast a look around. "The man at the telegraph," said he, "must either engage a gardener or devote himself passionately to agriculture." Suddenly he struck against something crouching behind a wheelbarrow filled with leaves. The something rose, uttering an exclamation of astonishment, and Monte Cristo found himself facing a man about 50 years old, who was plucking strawberries, which he was placing upon grape leaves. He had 12 leaves and about as many strawberries, which, on rising suddenly, he let fall from his hand. "You are gathering your crop, sir?" said Monte Cristo, smiling. "Excuse me, sir," replied the man, raising his hand to his cap. "I am not up here, I know, but I have only just come down." "Do not let me interfere with you in anything, my friend," said the count. "Gather your strawberries, if indeed there are any left." "I have 10 left," said the man, "for here are 11, and I had 22, 5 more than last year. But I am not surprised. The spring has been warm this year, and strawberries require heat, sir. This is the reason that, instead of the 16 I had last year, I have this year, you see, 11, already plucked. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Ah, I missed 3. They were here last night, sir. I am sure they were here. I counted them. It must be the Mayor Simon's son who has stolen them. I saw him strolling about here this morning. Ah, the young rascal! Stealing in a garden. He does not know where that may lead him to." "Certainly it is wrong," said Monte Cristo, "but you should take into consideration the youth and greediness of the delinquent." "Of course," said the gardener, "but that does not make it less unpleasant. But, sir, once more I beg pardon, perhaps you are an officer and I am detaining here." And he glanced timidly at the count's blue coat. "Calm yourself, my friend," said the count, with the smile which he made at will either terrible or benevolent, and which now expressed only the kindliest feeling. "I am not an inspector, but a traveller, brought here by a curiosity he half repents of, since he causes you to lose your time." "Ah, my time is not valuable," replied the man with a melancholy smile. "Still it belongs to government, and I ought not to waste it. But, having received the signal that I might rest for an hour," here he glanced at the sun-dial, for there was everything in the enclosure of Montlhéry, even a sun-dial, "and having 10 minutes before me, and my strawberries being ripe, when a day longer. By the by, sir, do you think dormice eat them?" "I should think so," replied Monte Cristo. "Dormice are bad neighbors for us who do not eat them preserved, as the Romans did." "What, did the Romans eat them?" said the gardener. "Ate dormice?" "I have read so in Petronius," said the count. "Really? They can't be nice, though they do say as fat as a dormouse. It is not a wonder that they are fat, sleeping all day and only waking to eat all night. Listen, last year I had 4 apricots. They stole 1, I had 1 nectarine, only 1. Well, sir, they ate half of it on the wall, a splendid nectarine, I never ate a better." "You ate it?" "That is to say, the half that was left. You understand, it was exquisite, sir. Ah, those gentlemen never choose the worst morsels, like Mayor Simon's son, who has not chosen the worst strawberries. But this year, continued the horticulturist. "I'll take care it shall not happen, even if I should be forced to sit by the whole night to watch them when the strawberries are ripe." Monte Cristo had seen enough. Every man has a devouring passion in his heart, as every fruit has its worm. That of the telegraph man was horticulture. He began gathering the grape leaves which screened the sun from the grapes, and won the heart of the gardener. "Did you come here, sir, to see the telegraph?" he said. "Yes, if it isn't contrary to the rules." "Oh, no," said the gardener, "not in the least, since there is no danger that anyone can possibly understand what we are saying." "I have been told," said the count, "that you do not always yourself understand the signals you repeat." "That is true, sir, and that is what I like best," said the man, smiling. "Why do you like that best?" "Because then I have no responsibility. I am a machine then, and nothing else, and so long as I work, nothing more is required of me." "Is it possible," said Monte Cristo to himself, "that I can have met with a man that has no ambition? That would spoil my plans." "Sir," said the gardener, glancing at the sundial, "the 10 minutes are almost up. I must return to my post. Will you go up with me?" "I follow you." Monte Cristo entered the tower, which was divided in 3 stories. The tower contained implements, such as spades, rakes, watering pots, hung against the wall. This was all the furniture. The second was the man's conventional abode, or rather sleeping place. It contained a few poor articles of household furniture, a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a stone pitcher, and some dry herbs, hung up to the ceiling, which the count recognized as sweet peas, and of which the good man was preserving the seeds. He had labelled them with as much care as if he had been master botanist in the Jardin des Plantes. "Does it require much study to learn the art of telegraphing?" asked Monte Cristo. "The study does not take long. It was acting as a supernumerary that was so tedious." "And what is the pay?" 1,000 francs, sir." "It is nothing." "No, but then we are lodged, as you perceive." Monte Cristo looked at the room. They passed to the 3rd story. It was the telegraph room. Monte Cristo looked in turn at the 2 iron handles by which the machine was worked. "It is very interesting," he said, "but it must be very tedious for a lifetime." "Yes, at first my neck was cramped with looking at it, but at the end of a year I became used to it, and then we have our hours of recreation, and our holidays." "Holidays?" "Yes." "When?" "When we have a fog." "Ah, to be sure." "Those are indeed holidays to me. I go into the garden, I plant, I prune, I trim, I kill the insects all day long." "How long have you been here?" 10 years, and 5 as a supernumerary make 15. "You are?" 55 years old. "How long must you have served to claim the pension?" "Oh, sir, 25 years." "And how much is the pension?" 100 crowns. "Poor humanity," murmured Monte Cristo. "What did you say, sir?" asked the man. "I am saying it was very interesting." "What was?" "All you were showing me. And you really understand none of these signals?" "None at all." "And have you ever tried to understand them?" "Never. Why should I?" "But still there are some signals only addressed to you." "Certainly." "And do you understand them?" "They are always the same." "And they mean——" "Nothing new, you have an hour, or tomorrow." "This is simple enough," said the count. "But look, is not your correspondent putting itself in motion?" "Ah, yes, thank you, sir." "And what is it saying? Anything you understand?" "Yes, it asks if I am ready." "And you reply?" "By the same sign, which at the same time tells my right-hand correspondent that I am ready, while it gives notice to my left-hand correspondent to prepare in his turn." "It is very ingenious," said the count. "You will see," said the man proudly; "in 5 minutes he will speak." "I have then 5 minutes," said Monte Cristo to himself. "It is more time than I require. My dear sir, will you allow me to ask you a question?" "What is it, sir?" You are fond of gardening?" "Passionately." "And you would be pleased to have, instead of this terrace of 20 feet, an enclosure of 2 acres?" "Sir, I would make a terrestrial paradise of it." "You live badly on your 1,000 francs?" "Badly enough, but yet I do live." "Yes, but you have a wretchedly small garden." "True, the garden is not large." "And, then, such as it is filled with dormice, who eat everything." "Ah, they are my scourges." "Tell me, should you have the misfortune to turn your head while your right-hand correspondent was telegraphing?" "I should not see him." "Then what would happen?" "I could not repeat the signals." "And then?" "Not having repeated them, through negligence, I should be fined." "How much?" 100 francs. "A tenth of your income; that would be fine work." "Ah," said the man. "Has it ever happened to you?" said Monte Cristo. "Once, sir, when I was grafting a rose tree." "Well, suppose you were to alter a signal, and substitute another?" "Ah, that is another case. I should be turned off, and lose my pension." 300 francs. 100 crowns, yes, sir. So you see that I am not likely to do any of these things." "Not even for 15 years' wages? Come, it is worth thinking about." "For 15,000 francs?" "Yes." "Sir, you alarm me." "Nonsense." "Sir, are you tempting me?" "Just so. 15,000 francs, do you understand?" "Sir, let me see my right-hand correspondent." "On the contrary, do not look at him, but at this." "What is it?" "What, do you not know these bits of paper?" "Bank notes." "Exactly. There are 15 of them." "And whose are they?" "Yours, if you like." "Mine!" exclaimed the man, half suffocated. "Yes, yours, your own property." "Sir, my right-hand correspondent is signaling." "Let him signal." "Sir, you have distracted me; I shall be fined." "That will cost you 100 francs. You see it is your interest to take my bank notes." "Sir, my right-hand correspondent redoubles his signals; he is impatient." "Never mind, take these." And the count placed the packet in the man's hands. "Now this is not all," he said; "you cannot live upon your 15,000 francs." "I shall still have my place." "No, you will lose it, for you are going to alter your correspondent's message." "Oh, sir, what are you proposing?" "A jest." "Sir, unless you force me." "I think I can effectually force you." And Monte Cristo drew another packet from his pocket. "Here are 10,000 more francs," he said. "With the 15,000 already in your pocket, they will make 25,000. With 5,000 you can buy a pretty little house with 2 acres of land. The remaining 20,000 will bring you in 1,000 francs a year." "A garden with 2 acres of land!" "And 1,000 francs a year." "Oh, heavens!" "Come, take them." And Monte Cristo forced the bank notes into his hand. "What am I to do?" "Nothing very difficult." "But what is it?"
"To repeat these signs." Monte Cristo took a paper from his pocket, upon which were drawn 3 signs, with numbers to indicate the order in which they were to be worked. "There, you see it will not take long."
"Yes, but——"
"Do this, and you will have nectarines on all the rest." The shot told. Red with fever, while the large drops fell from his brow, the man executed, one after the other, the 3 signs given by the count, in spite of the frightful contortions of right-hand correspondent, who, not understanding the change, began to think the gardener had gone mad. As to the left-hand one, he conscientiously repeated the same signals, which were finally transmitted to the Minister of the Interior. "Now you are rich," said Monte Cristo.
"Yes," replied the man, "but at what a price!"
"Listen, friend," said Monte Cristo, "I do not wish to cause you any remorse. Believe me, then, when I swear to you that you have wronged no man, but on the contrary have benefited mankind."
The man looked at the bank notes, felt them, counted them, turned pale, then red, then rushed into his room to drink a glass of water, but he had no time to reach the water jug, and fainted in the midst of his dried herbs. 5 minutes after the new telegram reached the minister, Debray had the horses put to his carriage, and drove to Danglars' house. "Has your husband any Spanish bonds?" he asked of the baroness. "I think so, indeed. He has 6 millions worth." "You must sell them at whatever price." "Why?" "Because Don Carlos has fled from Bourges, and has returned to Spain." "How do you know?" Debray shrugged his shoulders. "The idea of asking how I hear the news," he said. The baroness did not wait for repetition. She ran to her husband, who immediately hastened to his agent, and ordered him to sell at any price. When it was seen that Danglars sold, the Spanish funds fell directly. Danglars lost 500,000 francs, but he rid himself of all his Spanish shares. The same evening the following was read in Le Messager: by telegraph. The king, Don Carlos, has escaped the vigilance of his guardians at Bourges, and has returned to Spain by the Catalonian frontier. Barcelona has risen in his favor. All that evening nothing was spoken of but the foresight of Danglars, who had sold his shares, and of all the luck of the stock jobber, who only lost 500,000 francs by such a blow. Those who had kept their shares, or bought those of Danglars, looked upon themselves as ruined, and passed a very bad night. Next morning Le Montier contained the following: "It was without any foundation that Le Messager, yesterday, announced the flight of Don Carlos and the revolt of Barcelona. The king, Don Carlos, has not left Bourges, and the peninsula is in the enjoyment of profound peace. A telegraphic signal, improperly interpreted, owing to the fog, was the cause of this error. The funds rose 1% higher than before they had fallen. This, reckoning his loss, and what he had missed gaining, made the difference of 1,000,000 to Danglars." "Good," said Monte Cristo to Morrel, who was at his house when the news arrived of the strange reverse of fortune of which Danglars had been the victim. "I have just made a discovery for 25,000 francs, for which I would have paid 100,000. "What have you discovered?" asked Morrel. "I have just discovered how a gardener may get rid of the dormice that eat his peaches." Chapter 61. Recording by Christine G. in Oslo, Norway. The 4th of March, 2012.